The Plague of Athens, the collapse of a civilization behind stone walls, 430 to 426 BC. Throughout history, people have always feared wars, armies, sieges, swords, and fire. Yet many of the disasters that truly changed human history were silent, invisible. When they arrived, they went unnoticed. When they left behind only empty streets, shattered families, and a changed world. Athens was the brightest star of ancient Greece. It was a city where the idea of democracy was born, where philosophy echoed through the streets, where theater searched the human soul on stage. The marbles of the Parthenon gleamed in the sunlight, and thinkers like Socrates asked questions in the agora. Athens was not merely a city, it was a living proof of what the human mind could achieve. But in the middle of the 5th century BC, this great city encountered an enemy within its own borders, one no one expected. This enemy was not as loud as Spartan hoplites, nor as magnificent as Persian fleets. This enemy arrived silently. It entered the human body, and from the inside, it began to destroy everything. Today, we call this event the Plague of Athens, but for the Athenians of that time, no one knew whether it was a divine punishment or a cruel twist of fate. The only thing they knew was this: life as they knew it was coming to an end. The Peloponnesian Wars were a great conflict that divided the ancient Greek world in two. On one side stood Sparta, relying on land power. On the other, Athens, ruling the seas. This war was not only between two city-states, but between two different ways of life. Athens' leader Pericles was known for his strategic intelligence. He knew that fighting the Spartan army in open terrain would be suicide. Therefore, he made a radical decision. The population of the Attic countryside would abandon their fields and villages and take refuge behind Athens' long walls. The city would effectively become a massive shelter. This decision made sense militarily, but socially and medically, its consequences would be catastrophic. In a short time, Athens' population multiplied. A city that normally lived with a certain order was surrendered to an uncontrollable crowd. People could not find housing, tents were set up around temples, streets turned into sleeping areas. Animals, people, children, and the elderly lived together in the same narrow spaces. Clean water was insufficient. Waste accumulated. Summer heat set in. And it was precisely in this environment that ideal conditions for death emerged. The outbreak first appeared at the port of Piraeus. This harbor, Athens' gateway to the world, was the center of trade and naval power. It was also the point of entry for diseases. Sailors began to fall ill, then dock workers. At first, no one took it seriously. Athens had seen diseases before, but this was different. The disease spread rapidly. Within days, it reached the city from the port. Narrow streets, crowded homes, and a lack of hygiene made the epidemic unstoppable. Rumors began circulating among the Athenians. Some claimed that the Spartans had poisoned the wells. Others spoke of the wrath of the gods, especially Apollo. Prophecies were recalled, old disasters reinterpreted, but no explanation reduced the number of the dead. The reason we know the Plague of Athens so detailed today is the historian Thucydides. He himself contracted the disease and survived. Therefore, what he describes is not merely observation, but lived experience. Thucydides conveys the symptoms of the disease in a cold, measured manner. There is no exaggeration in his lines, and precisely for that reason, the account is chilling. The disease begins suddenly. First, an intense heat in the head. The eyes redden, the throat dries, the tongue burns. Breathing becomes difficult. Then nausea and vomiting begin. Most patients experience severe diarrhea. The body rapidly loses water. Thirst becomes unbearable. Patients want to throw themselves into cold water. Some actually run to wells and fountains and die there. Sores appear on the skin. Some patients lose fingers, toes, or even their eyesight. Mental symptoms are also common: delirium, memory loss, clouded consciousness. Most patients die between the 7th and 9th day. Those who live longer generally survive, but at a heavy cost. The epidemic soon became uncontrollable. Homes filled with the sick. There were people lying in the streets. There was no one left to help because everyone was either sick, frightened, or dead. Funerals could no longer be properly performed. Traditional burial rituals were abandoned. Bodies were piled on top of one another, sometimes left uncollected for days. Birds and dogs began approaching the dead. Thucydides recounts how people secretly placed their own dead onto the funeral pyres of others. For a society like Athens, which placed great importance on rituals, this was a moral collapse. Death had become ordinary. At first, people flocked to temples. Prayers were offered, sacrifices were made. The mercy of the gods was sought. But the epidemic did not stop. The temples themselves filled with disease. Priests died. Oracles fell silent. At this point, a dangerous thought began to spread among the Athenians. We are going to die anyway. This idea shattered the moral order. Laws were ignored. People turned to short-term pleasures. The rich spent their wealth. The poor struggled to survive. The shared values of society collapsed. Solidarity diminished. Fear prevailed. Athens' leader, Pericles, could not escape the epidemic either. He first lost members of his family. Then he himself fell ill. He resisted for a long time, but in the end, he too passed away. The death of Pericles was a turning point for Athens. He was not merely a politician. He was Athens' vision. The leaders who followed him did not possess the same strategic depth. Athens had now lost its direction. The epidemic also struck the Athenian army. Soldiers fell ill. Crew shortages began in the navy. Morale collapsed. Sparta, however, was not affected to the same extent. This fact determined the course of the war. Athens weakened defensively, and its offensive capacity declined. The epidemic accomplished what swords could not. For centuries, this question has been asked. Thucydides' descriptions have been examined under the lens of modern medicine. The diseases proposed include typhoid fever, typhus, smallpox, measles, viral hemorrhagic fevers. DNA studies conducted in 2006 on a mass grave found in Athens strengthened the possibility of typhoid fever. However, this is not definitive. Perhaps this disease was a pathogen that no longer exists today. The Plague of Athens is the first major epidemic in history to be documented in detail. It is also one of the rare events that single-handedly changed the fate of a civilization. Had this epidemic not occurred, could Athens-Sparta war have ended differently? Would democracy have spread earlier? Would Western history have followed another path? There are no answers to these questions, but there is one thing we know. The Plague of Athens revealed humanity's fragility in its rawest form. Athens had stone walls, it had a navy, it had wealth, art, and philosophy, but it was defenseless against an invisible enemy. The Plague of Athens teaches us this. What destroys a civilization is not always enemy armies. Sometimes a breath, a drop of water, a microbe is enough.